All right, hey everybody. So this is a webinar for why every project needs a BIM execution plan. Thank you very much for taking some time out today to watch this. I'm Michelle Ovelson. I'm a BIM consultant with Summit AEC, and we're just going to go ahead and get started here. So what I wanted to talk about on this webinar is go through some of the basics of an execution plan, what it is, what's in them, and then I want to talk about some tips for having an effective execution plan. So making sure that a lot of times we hear people that don't really understand why we need one. They don't really understand or get the benefit out of them. So I really wanted to focus down on how we can get those benefits for not just the big infrastructure projects, but for any everyday project. There's benefits to be had by having a good plan in place. And then the next thing I'm going to go through are some common issues that happen around not having an execution plan. So we're going to go through and talk about where things could have been avoided if there was a strong execution plan in place. All right, so first thing is, what is an execution plan? So an execution plan is basically the rule book for your project. And this rule book should be read by everybody involved in the project. So it's really good to get not only the techs that are doing a lot of the work, or the modelers that are doing a lot of the modeling for the project, but also getting, the lead architect, the project manager, the people that are getting the project started at the very beginning. They should all be aware of what's in an execution plan and how it should be used. So I'm just going to open up one of our execution plans that we develop for clients. So starting out, this is kind of one of the only paragraphs that are in this execution plan. So just a brief overview of what this document is doing, that it's supposed to be a living document, that you want to be reviewing it at every milestone submission. So the next things that we want in an execution plan, it's to be filled out by people. So you want to reduce the number of words and paragraphs and explanations as much as possible in this document, because this is the one that you're going to be using. So if you want to have another document that explains, why certain things are in here, how to fill them out, or just backgrounds on what an execution plan is and why it's needed, that should really be a separate document that people can refer to if they need to. But otherwise, for people that have used documents before they know, they kind of know the drill with it, this should really just be very simple and quick for people to fill out and get information from. It's kind of a, what do I need to know and what do I need to fill out, and it shouldn't take a lot of time to go through. So in here, we start out with just some basic project information. We want to know the owner, the name, address, contract type, a basic description of the project, if it's, new construction, renovation job, phased, all that kind of stuff. And then next we get into contact information. So we have main contacts for organizations. So this is who you're the lead contact for the project. And then we have team information. So the reason we don't just include one lead contact is because when you're working on the project, you might need to talk to specific people for specific reasons. So if it's related specifically to a model, there's an issue with the architectural model, the mechanical consultant needs to talk to somebody who knows what's going on in the model. That might be more referred to the job captain. So then you're going to want to talk to them, because the architecture lead might not know or have the hands-on intricacies with the model itself. So this just allows you to have a few more contacts that you can choose from. And then we also include in here the time zones. So especially if you're dealing with consultants across Canada or across the United States, it's better to know where their time zones are at so that you can coordinate times to call them, or even just for meetings, it gives you a better understanding of where everybody's at. So next we go down into project details. So this is file naming convention. This is super important because you want to make sure that the names are understood as to what they are. So even, for example, if you keep continuing with just putting a prefix in between the project number and description, you'll notice structural and site both have S's. So how are you going to deal with that? Is structural going to be ST, or is site going to be SI? Or how are you going to differentiate between not having two models have the same name? The next section is the specific goals and requirements. So this again is something that should be thought of at the very beginning of the project. What are you trying to achieve with this project? Are you just getting, this is a smaller project, maybe all you're really doing is using 2D drawings, a more traditional kind of method of project workflow. So there's not a lot of, real huge BIM things going on. That's fine. You just want to make sure that, you document that out, that, we don't have any big goals for clash detection or uses with contractor or client. Then everybody kind of knows, this is what we need to achieve. And that's really very straightforward. If you do have project goals and specific requirements like clash detection, like cost estimation, if things are going to be used, if the client wants to use this model in any way, those really need to be fleshed out at the beginning. There's nothing worse than going through your project and halfway through the client asking, oh, hey, can you do a quick clash detection report for us? There has to be things set up in place at the beginning so that we can make sure that those things can happen. So again, this isn't just making sure that the users know this, but also making sure that the people talking to the client at the very, very beginning are aware of fleshing out some of those goals and requirements so that the project can plan for it proactively rather than trying to react when the client wants certain things. So it's very important to put that in here, just, put out the goal and then start thinking about how that's going to get achieved. Do you need, if you want to do clash detection, then that factors into how people model stuff. What are you clashing against? Who's going to do those reports? When are they going to do those reports? So then you might need to add a section to this execution plan to deal with how that's going to be, how that's going to happen. Additional software consideration as well. So thinking of what software do you need to achieve this goal? Do people have it? Do you need to buy it? Do you need to install it? All that stuff needs to be kind of worked out at the very beginning. So the next one is software use and versions. So again, this is just going through what kind of software the different consultants are going to be using, and then just knowing at the beginning what that means for people who want to work together. So if you're going to do clash detection, but certain consultants are using AutoCAD, how does that affect your goals? And then also the version. So this doesn't happen as much as it used to, but you get situations where people thought, they were working in 2018. Other people thought you were going to work in 2019. They get the model and it's in 2019. They don't have the software installed yet, maybe. So then that's downtime for them where they have to scramble to get stuff in place and installed. So at the very beginning, you should have that discussion to say, what version of Revit are we going to be using? And then also including the build on that, especially important if you have two design consultants working on the same model, because you're going to get way better performance and fewer corruption issues and crashing. But even just for consultants linking models together, it is best practice to all be on the same build. You're just going to get the most consistency and the most stability out of your models. So that's where you want to write that down on here. And then if you guys are doing a project that's going for a few years, how are you going to deal with upgrades? Are you going to be upgrading the model? Make sure you kind of have a planned discussion about if we are going to do that, then you set a schedule for that and you make sure everybody's on the same page. So information exchange and scheduling. So this is how you guys are going to exchange and collaborate with your information. So are Revit files being put on BIM 360? Are you guys using an FTP site, a Dropbox? If you're doing kind of FTP, how often are people uploading? If you're doing virtual coordination, how are those models getting put into an FTP or a folder situation? Where is that going? So a lot of this stuff fleshes out questions that you may not have thought of at the beginning, and it's all about being proactive on this project versus trying to react later to say, oh, we need a folder for this, we'll put it here and send that out while people are waiting. So that's all of the exchange and collaboration. Then you've got your project phases and milestones. So again, if your milestone submission's up here, so if you have certain milestones where files need to get exchanged, we want to put in the dates for these different milestones and the dates where they need to be in here, and then the responsible party for who has to do those exchanges. So then we have modeling strategy. So this is work sets for the different models. The reason I like to include stuff like this in here is for situations like this, where you might have architectural that likes to model certain consultant items like light fixtures, columns. So if you want to do something like clash detection, you're going to get duplications because architecture and structure are both modeling something, and that's a problem. So putting out in here to say, you know what, we're going to have this stuff modeled, but we're going to put it on our own work set that you can turn off, so that if they're bringing models into their structural model, they can turn off that consultant placeholder work set and know that now you're not going to see duplications of elements. So work sets are really important just to figure out how the model's being organized, and if there's certain things that don't need to be loaded into other models, then it's important to know that as well, or if there's duplications, just having a plan in place for how that's going to work. So then we have levels. So you want to write down your big levels, so your kind of floor slab levels. Make sure that the naming is consistent and that everybody has the same elevation for that. So that's something we can check against down the road to make sure that if something's changed, you update it here and you let everybody know, you know, we're moving a level up a certain amount. You can also put in auxiliary levels as well, so levels that are just specific to a certain consultant, and what those that are just specific to a certain consultant, and what those ones are, what's their purpose, what are they being used for. Okay, so next is the project units. So again, just having that quick discussion if it's metric or imperial, if there's rounding. Origin and coordinate system, this is really important, especially if you have larger projects that, maybe not even large projects, but projects that have multiple buildings on a site. How are you guys going to locate each of those buildings? Where are their origin points? And making sure that that's consistent across the board. That really helps down the road if you have to get all those models and put them into one spot like Navisworks. That's going to save you some time. Also thinking about true north and project north. So working out if you are doing a true north and a project north, what that angle is, and making sure that's consistent. Phasing, so if you are using any phasing in your project, if it's a renovation job, or maybe this is being done in 1 or 2 or 3 construction phases, making sure you document out how that's working, and so that everyone can be consistent with how they're doing their phasing in the models as well. Modeling deviations. So again, this is getting into more things that are kind of on that higher level of BIM. So if you have a goal where you're using clash detection or cost estimation, this is to point out situations that can't be modeled. So if you're not modeling certain items in your project, this is where you would write out, you know, you can't use motors for 3D clash because we're just using a 2D family. And so it's kind of putting in, having that discussion at the beginning for, you know, if you look at the list of what people want to do clashes against, where are there areas where they're not going to be able to do it because you weren't planning on modeling certain things. And so it's just, again, kind of proactively figuring out where those issues are going to be, and then having a plan in place to deal with those. So workflow issue, this is mostly dealing with kind of workflow issues between consultants. So if you have duplications of things like architectural and mechanical plumbing fixtures, then you come up with a plan to either say, you know, we're going to put certain duplications on a work set so that you can turn them off, or maybe architectural gets the toilets, the mechanical gets the openings, just kind of coming up with a plan for where there could be duplications and how you guys are going to make sure that when you need to do a clash detection or have the models all together, that you've looked at those so that the model looks really good when you get to that stage. Quality control protocols. So this is kind of dealing with virtual coordination. So the clash detection portion. So if you are going to be using clash detection in here, you're going to want to work out the plan for that. So you're wanting to write out what you're clashing against. So it's not just about structural model versus mechanical model. You want to be more specific. You want to say, you know, structural beams versus mechanical ducts, and, you know, really itemize out what's getting checked against one another, so that, again, the consultants as a team can look at that list and make sure that they don't have any issues with what they're modeling. And then when you go to do the clash detection, everybody's very clear on what the output's going to be, what's the client or the contractor going to get out of those. You can also put in here soft clashes. So if you have clearances, we can work out which ones those are going to be. And then just a bit of an explanation on who's going to be doing the reports. So who's taking, so down here, if we look at the coordination schedule, who's going to be doing the clash detections, when are they going to be happening? There's a few parts happening with that where you have to first collect the models. So when do you collect the models, and then when do you do the report and the meeting to show the issues? So that all needs to be planned out as well. Okay, and then lastly, you can have an agreement or a sign off. This really only applies if it's part of your contract. So you have to, again, at the very beginning, when you're first getting this project rolling, you're going to want to have those discussions about, is the BIM execution plan going to be something that we're going to make as part of the contract? If it's not, then you're going to want to remove this from it, and it's just going to be more so kind of rules for the project, but not really having that kind of sign off portion to it. And then you can have at the end any glossary terms of things that might not be completely clear as to what they mean, or any clarifications that might be required at the end here. So that's the basics of an execution plan. So here I'm just going to talk about some tips for it. So the big thing that I like to see for an execution plan or standards or any document is it needs to be very concise and to the point. So like I said before, you don't want to put in a lot of paragraphs and a lot of explanation about each item that people have to read through. If you want to have that kind of explanation and training information, put that in a separate document so that people can refer to it when they need to. But if they want to just fill out the document and know what they need to know to do the job, you want it to be very, very concise and very small. Only put the information in that absolutely needs to be in there. Delete sections that do not apply to your project. So I see this a lot. I think this is kind of an area that people get intimidated by in your execution plan. So if you have, when they get it for their project, they want to fill it out, but they don't want to delete stuff that might need to be in there or should be in there. So what you want to do is, don't be afraid. If you're not doing anything related to virtual coordination or clashes, get rid of it. Don't be afraid to make this document work for your project, because the worst thing you can do is leave in a bunch of stuff that doesn't apply, and then as you give that out to people, they're going to read it and say, well, this doesn't really apply, and it starts to lose its value because they just can't really, they start to doubt the document and they don't really trust the information. So if it doesn't apply to your project, that's totally fine. Just get rid of it. If it's a very simple, small project where you're really only getting 2D drawings out of it, you can still use this and make use of things like software being used, of goals for the project, of project naming. That's all still really useful. If the other stuff isn't useful to you and you don't care and the consultants don't care, get rid of it. Make sure that the information that you guys really care about is in here, and the stuff that you're not really using for that particular project can get removed out of there. So I would rather see people only using part of this document than not using it at all. So don't be afraid to customize it and make it work for your project. That's huge. Work out where it's going to be hosted. So if this is going to be a living document that's getting updated all the time, you have to figure out how that's going to work. So is it a situation where people are going to make markups and comments and write up their stuff and then send it back to one person so that they can combine it all together? That's a little bit clunky, but it gets done a lot, and that's fine, but plan for that. Ideally, it's on somewhere that people can live edit it. So if you have it on something like OneDrive or Google Docs, then people can go in and make changes live on the fly and everybody can see each other's comments. If you are going to do it live, I would suggest having a plan in place like pen colors so that you know who's marking up what and what that all looks like, just so that everybody can keep track of who's making what markups. But the plan is just to make sure that it's accessible to people for them to edit, and make sure that it's staying up to date. So the other thing that's really important is keeping it current. If this document, you have a startup meeting and you're really excited, you go through the whole document and then that's it, that's a problem, because people are going to look at the document and say, oh, well, this, we have levels in here now and they're not up to date, or this information isn't correct anymore. As soon as that happens, your document is dead. Nobody's going to read it. Everyone's going to assume that it's out of date, even if it does become up to date later. But you've then just lost a lot of the power of this document. So take the time to make sure that you put this as part of your project priorities. So have time scheduled to update this document. Have time to go through it on a regular basis so that people can find out, what the new things are in the document, what's changed, have access to the most current information. So you have to really plan to make sure that you can keep it up to date, because if it's not, then it's really just not going to be used. So that's really important. So the next thing was, so why do you need this document? So I'm just going to go through a couple instances that I've come across where there's been issues with the document or issues with a project, and an execution plan could have really made the difference. So this can be really small things. Like I had a situation where we grabbed project files for a project that had multiple consultants, and 2 or 3 of the consultants had the same name for their model. So not a big deal, but it's time consuming, where you have to say, you know what, you guys have the same name here. Can you change this? Or you have to change it yourself so that you can do the clash or whatever you're going to do with the models. So again, it's just that whole thing of being reactive versus being proactive. You don't want to have to spend that time to get in touch with them, figure out how they're going to change their name, what's that name going to be. It's done at the beginning. It's already straightforward. This one, the consultant's using a different year of Revit than the others. So this more so would be like right when you're at, especially at a time where a new version of Revit comes out. So then, maybe you get the architect that wants to use the latest. They're using 2019 already. But then maybe a different consultant doesn't have 2019 installed yet. So then that's downtime for them where they're ready to get started on the project. They get a model in 19 and then they're saying, oh gosh, we need to contact IT, get installations done, get stuff set up, get our content upgraded to 19. Like that's a bit of work that has to happen. So you need to have that conversation at the beginning to say, what version is everybody okay with doing, and then have a plan for upgrading at different times. Not being aware that the consultant is using CAD, but the goal is clash detection. So if you had conversations with your client at the very beginning that, they wanted to do clash detection reports, but then you realize that, maybe interior or electrical is using 2D CAD, that's an issue, because now you have to go back and say, okay, well, or how are we going to fix this? Because they're using CAD, now we can't really do the clash detection we wanted to do. So it's working out all those rules at the very beginning and making sure that's documented so that we know, even down the road, if for some reason clash detection became part of the goals and it wasn't initially, we can quickly see, okay, everybody's using Revit, so yeah, we might be able to get some clashes in there, or say, nope, we have AutoCAD used here and here, that's not really even an option for us. So it's just having it written down, and so that it's very, very clear to understand how you're going to be able to move forward. Using BIM 360 without consultants being aware of the cost or potentially some training involved in that. So somebody on the team wants to use BIM 360, but maybe it doesn't get sent across to everybody on the team that that's the plan. You have to purchase that software. You have to have it installed. You have to have maybe a session for people to understand how to use it and what you're going to use it for. That all takes a lot of planning. So making sure that people are aware of where that stuff is going to be hosted, where your model is going to be hosted, how you're going to be using them in that way. That's all stuff that really needs to get put in here and come up with a plan for how that's going to work. So some more examples here. So we've got the lead person in that project leaves the company. So someone new has to come in and take over the project. So this can happen where, maybe people, even if people get shuffled around on a project and they have to join this project and start working, it's nice to have an understanding of what this project is about. So just having a central location where they can read this, they have ideas of who they need to contact, who's on the team, what this project information, what's the description of the project, what's it about, all this stuff related to, you know, what different software they're using. They can get up to date really quickly on this project versus having to, you know, touch base with 2 or 3 other people, or if there were BIM execution plan meetings that they weren't a part of, you know, they can, it's been documented, so at least they know kind of what's been going on and what's up to date. This document would be very important to give to that new person to say, okay, this is the background on what's going on this project, and then it takes out them having to sift through information or talk to different people. It's all in one spot where they can get going right away. So client wants to do clash detection, but it wasn't clear at the beginning of the project. So again, I've kind of touched on this before, where you want to make sure that if you want to have these conversations with the client at the beginning, and this is why it's so important to have, you know, the higher up members that are kind of setting up these projects before it even gets put into a model, to understand what we're going to try to achieve with this project. So it's just really important to have those initial conversations to say, you know, clash detection just doesn't happen on its own. You have to plan for it. You have to model for it in a certain way. You have to make sure that things are set up so that it's easy to do. But if that's not on the list of goals and people aren't aware that that's what's going to happen, it's a lot of last minute reacting to something that wasn't necessarily understood at the beginning. So it's flushing out with the client and whoever's having these first discussions about your scope of work, what they want to use if they're going to be using the model. How do they want to use it? What do they want to get from it? Not just even clash detection, but if they want to pull any data from it, you know, that's huge. That's stuff that really has to be planned for. And if it's not planned for, then it's going to be very hard to kind of retroactively make that stuff happen. So just even having that project manager or that project architect understand that there's an execution plan, that, you know, there's questions they need to ask so that we can get clarification for how that relates, how that actually gets done downstream, is really, really important. So everyone has different origin points, and we need to combine the file into Navisworks. So this has happened before, where there was a project that had, I think, 4 different buildings with 4 different consultants. Every single building had a different project base point. So having to go back after the fact and, you know, combine that into Navisworks, get them all in the right spot so that you can run a clash detection, that's a huge amount of time that it takes, rather than just, you know, at the beginning going through and saying, what are my origin points going to be? So building A is going to be at grids this and this, building B here. So everybody knows that at the beginning, and then it gets fixed for later, even if it wasn't done right in the first spot, so that it all gets put into the same spot. And then it just makes things so much smoother down the road when you account for a certain amount of time to do something like clash detection, and then you get kind of hit with this curveball that now you have to go in and fix models and move stuff around. And that can be a lot of time-consuming stuff that wasn't planned for. So it's really important to have that origin in place and working out that, you know, you're going from origin to origin, not messing around with base points kind of willy-nilly, making sure that, you know, that's a very planned and set thing. And True North, Project North, making sure that people aren't just, you know, rotating buildings, that, you know, you have a real angle set up for your Project North, and you know what your True North is, and making sure you're all the same on that, so that it just makes things downstream that much more smooth to do. So it's very important. So just to kind of go through some of the big points here. Execution plan, I can't stress enough to make it concise and to the point. People, just through dealing with standard documents for different clients, any kind of documentation, like as a tech, I don't like to read essays. I don't like to read even specs, really. Make it so that it's, you know, what do I need to know to get my job done? That's what you want this thing to achieve. So you want it to be very straightforward, to the point. A lot of tables for things for people to fill out. Make sure the information is really easy and quick to find. And then again, if you need to have that other documentation that explains it in more detail as to what the background of why you need an execution plan and what it's doing, have that separate, and you can refer to that document separately. But just make sure that this is really, really concise and straight to the point. The next thing you want is also getting rid of things that don't apply. So don't be afraid if you have a project that is a smaller project. You don't need a ton of, it's not really a true BIM project, but it's, it's going to 2D drawings. We want to make benefits, use the benefits of Revit and coordination. That's totally fine. So just get rid of the stuff that doesn't apply to your project. Don't be afraid to do that, because there's still so many benefits just with basic information that you can make use of in here, but you don't want it to be bloated with stuff that doesn't apply, because then again, people aren't going to want to use it. And the next thing is making it accessible to the team. So making sure that wherever you have this document, if you can have it live, that's probably the best way to go. And so everybody can access it at any point. They can edit it without having to, email back and forth to get the latest versions. It's always up to date, it's live, it's ready to go. It can be referred to all the time. So just having a plan in place for that to make sure that people know where to find it. If you are going to be doing the route where people mark it up and send it back to one person to consolidate, make sure that that gets done really quickly and people stay on top of that, because if you have comments and markups and those don't get updated for weeks at a time, again, you lose that value because it's not going to be up to date and people aren't going to be able to trust the information. Keep it current, so kind of like what I was relating to before, make sure that people have it up to date. So include in your project the execution plan, not just the startup meeting, but have a plan in place for referring back to the execution plan on a regular basis on your project meetings, making sure that that's embedded into the project so that people are using it. If there's, as far as the format goes for this document, if there's things you want to add to this, if there's things that exist elsewhere, so maybe in a separate document, you guys keep the milestones. Don't put it in two spots. Then, take this section out and say, refer to document here. Find a way to take what you guys have for documentation and combine it with the execution plan, so you're only putting information in one spot and everyone knows where to find it. So, and then get project managers involved. So it's making sure that it's not just for the Revit users. It's not just about modeling. It's also about planning, about getting the right people at the beginning to ask the right questions to the client so that they can understand how that affects the downstream use of the model. So really take time to talk to the lead architects, the project managers, and talk to the users about how having a very good planned approach for what you want to achieve from this model is important all the way through. So you have to ask the right questions to the client, and then when you get those goals figured out, what does that mean downstream? How are you going to achieve those goals? So figure out what that means for software, what that means for how people are going to model. All of that stuff has to get planned out. It's not just going to necessarily happen. You want clash detection, you just make it happen. It's planned. It has to be organized and set up and thought of. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we just went over? So I'm going to leave questions open for about 5 to 10 minutes, see if people have questions. So if you have anything you want to add or comments or anything like that, feel free to put that in the question section. So I'll leave that for a couple minutes here. I see we've got one question. Is it possible to get a sample copy of your execution plan? I knew this question was going to come up. So ideally, this is an execution plan that we work with our clients to develop. So you can always give us an email or get in contact with us if it's something that you want us to help you develop one for yourself, because we usually like to tailor these ones specifically for the clients that are going to be using them, and there's a lot of factors that can change what an execution plan looks like. So we're not necessarily just giving this one out, but if you guys want something like that, then you can get in touch with us. All right. Let me just see this other question. Yeah, so so Bob Heyman in our office just said we'd be happy to share this with those who want to engage with us. So like I said, if you guys are interested further in getting a copy of this, just shoot us a phone call or an email, and then we'll be in touch that way. All right, so if there are no other questions, at any point you guys can definitely get in touch with me if you think of something later that you'd want to discuss. So otherwise, I'm gonna say thank you very much for taking some time to attend this webinar today. I hope you guys were able to get some information. Can I get a copy of the document? We talked about that. Okay, so yeah, thanks for attending. This one is being recorded, so it will go up on our YouTube channel in a few hours or a day or two. So our YouTube channel is Summit AEC. You can follow us on Twitter at Summit AEC. We also have a blog where we'll post this with the video. The BIM blog, summitaec.com/BIM blog. You can email me if you guys have any questions or want to discuss anything in more detail later. But otherwise, thank you very much for attending, and hope you have a great rest of your day.